Oh, sorry, and I forgot about the Dutch. Of course, how can we forget about the Dutch? So the Orange Empire is going to be the Empire of the Netherlands, but you can just call it the Dutch Empire or the Dutch Colonial Empire, if you want to be a little more historically accurate. Okay, the Netherlands or the Dutch. Yes? Sure, so the first column of this worksheet is the empire and the map color. And it starts at the top yellow, then it goes white, blue, right? So the yellow one is going to be Spain. This will be more apparent when it's not just some text here, but when you're looking at big maps. You're actually looking at images. Right, so we're just doing that first column. We talked before about how in this class you're supposed to learn content, like a bunch of information. You're also supposed to practice skills. I'd say this is the most important skill we're going to practice on today. Students using a variety of maps and documents to interpret human movement. The rest of this is definitely in there, but I wouldn't focus on it too much. You're going to be working with maps. Some learning goals. You're going to see an example. Folks, let me get your attention in the back, please. Today you're going to see an example of a secondary source that uses primary source material to model historical activity on a global scale. A couple of these words. So when we talk about a primary source, we're talking about something that is hundreds of years old, that's from the era. When we talk about a secondary source, that's something that's in our era. So it's like a historian writing an argument is a secondary source. The primary source might be the letters that the historian read to write the argument. This secondary source, the current day thing, is using the primary source material, and it's modeling historical activity. Do you remember when we did the transportation model? We were in the library, or the K2 computer room, and you were modeling how far you could bike or drive in an hour from the train station. So what these people are going to do is they're going to model movement, but it's going to be on a global scale. And they're going to be using historical primary sources. It's very impressive research. And it helps us teach, this particular content standard, which is right here, knowing the locations of colonial rule for Spain, France, England, and the Netherlands. Okay? And the last part here, we're going to observe how similar historical and modern shipping routes are, including major bottlenecks. Do we know what a bottleneck is? Yes, what's a bottleneck, Ben?
It's like a narrow entrance that a lot of people go through.
A narrow entrance that a lot of people go through. Can someone give me an example on Vanden's campus of a bottleneck where a lot of people every day are trying to go through and they get stuck kind of moving through it? Shakir. The cages. Charlie. Which one?
I was going to say cage.
Cage, Ben? Wow, so everybody's pretty much unified on the cages. Yes. The gym as well. Okay, gym can be a bottleneck. The entrance to the gym. Yes.
Classroom?
A classroom, the door of a classroom, right? So when we talk about global shipping, you might think that. Let me just get your attention, folks. When we talk about global shipping, you might just think it's all big, wide open oceans. But the truth is, when you're trying to make an efficient path from one part of the earth to the other, you often end up finding these little bottlenecks. You get kind of like everyone's going in the same place. So we'll look at just an example or two of those. We're going to activate some prior knowledge. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So what did Columbus discover in 1492? I'm hearing Central America. What else? So just to be more specific, he discovered an island in the Caribbean. But generally, let's say zoom out. What did Columbus discover in a big picture sense? America! The New World. Absolutely. And were there people living in the New World?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so who discovered it? Anyway, after the European discovery of the New World, what kind of plants, animals, and ideas became part of the Columbian exchange? Remember I talked on Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day that the better way of understanding it is that it was an exchange between two peoples. Yes?
Did they get peppers from the New World?
They did. Peppers came from the New World. Tomatoes came from the New World. What was something that the Europeans brought?
Illness.
Yes. You guys both nailed it. Yes, horrible diseases that killed up to 90% of the Native American population. So many people died that it caused an effect in climate. There's a measurable effect in the global climate pattern because of the mass death of the Columbian exchange. And what about, let's thinking of the Irish. What's something that the New World brought over that affected the Irish quite dramatically? Potatoes. All 33 of them. Okay. And what is an example of how Europe and the Americas were linked in the triangle trade? You might remember this from, say, 8th grade or even 6th grade. The triangle trade. So the triangle is Europe, Africa, and North America, or Central, I should say just the Americas. It was South America, the Caribbean, and North America. So that's the triangle. Europe, down to Africa, over to the Americas, and back to Europe. What was going on in that triangle trade? Ava?
Wait, no, I don't have the answer to the question, but I have another question.
Okay, what's your other question?
What do I write in the imperial motivation box?
We haven't gotten there yet, but you are ahead of the game. Good job.
I just want to make sure I didn't skip over it.
Yes, well, when we get there, I'll make sure to point it out. So in the triangle trade, Europe to Africa to the Americas, what were some of the goods that were being exchanged? Yes. Yes, so I should say goods and people, right? Because the Europeans were going down to Africa, they were obtaining unfree labor, bringing it over to the New World, often employing that labor in extractive or commodity industries. Sugarcane growth and the production of sugar was a particularly difficult job, and it produced sugar, which was very desired in Europe. So that triangle kind of moved goods and people across the Atlantic Ocean. So this is our secondary source. This is the thing that a group of historians put together, except interestingly, they're not historians. These are all climate scientists. Garcia Herrera, Conan, Wheeler, Prieto Jones, and Koch. So these are people who study the environment, but they did history. And it's a really neat meeting of the two fields. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to show you this. So we can use this to chart the shipping lanes in the era of European colonialism. Now, how on earth can we do that? So I talked earlier about primary sources and secondary sources. So this is an example of a primary source. This is an English logbook by a ship captain who every day at noon, when the sun was at the middle point of the sky, he would measure where they were at, where they thought they were at on the map. He would write that detail down. He would measure how fast they were traveling, write that in another column. And then he would measure wind speed and other kind of, sort of details that are important to navigation. But they did that every day at noon, right? Each line, each row of this is one day, one dot. And these books went on per ship, per captain, for pages and pages and pages. They also have 591 of them that they digitized. Then that was for the English. For the Spanish, which of course they started their age of exploration even earlier, they had 408 books. And for the Dutch, they had 613. So I just want you to imagine how ambitious a research project this is. These are whole libraries worth of records and very detailed measurements that they're putting into a massive spreadsheet, database, they're analyzing it and so on. And it's really to our benefit in a history class because we get to see how those measurements revealed what shipping really actually looked like 300 years ago. There weren't GPS monitoring and none of that. We had to reconstruct it from old books. Yes, Ben?
I thought it was red.
Yes, that's a very good observation. I also picked this up in the last class. So we're talking about Spanish colonies. The first map that you're going to see, these are going to be indicated in red, but again, this is just one image. The next image won't be quite the same as this. So I'll hop over to that next image, just so it's more neutral. Where are we seeing Spanish colonies? Where in the world are we seeing Spanish colonies? Go ahead and name continents or regions out loud.
North America.
Ben's got North America. Do we have another person who wants to name a region? Yes. South America, absolutely, especially down here, the Andean region and the Southern Cone. Yes?
Is that Indonesia on the right?
That's not Indonesia. Do we know what this island archipelago is? I'll give you a hint. Oh, I heard it.
Philippines?
The Philippines. The Spanish colony in the Philippines as well. So you can write North America. Ava, to answer your question, we're writing now in the middle column on locations of colonies.
Wait, I thought the middle column was the place. I wrote down Spain.
It is this place. So where are some of these places? So we had, earlier we had a student say North America. We had someone say South America. Do we remember what this one is? This is the Philippines. Also, what about this region in between North and South America? Well, there is Central America, yes. But I'm talking about all these islands over here. What do we call that? The pirates of the Caribbean. The Caribe. So we've got North America, South America, Caribbean, and the Philippines for the locations of your Spanish colonies. And now, remember those logbooks with all those detailed entries? Remember, each one, every line is one dot, okay? So this is pretty remarkable stuff. This is a incredible reconstruction of the actual Spanish Empire based on its shipping patterns, but it's real information. This isn't just like theoretical. They combed through those books, and each entry got one dot. And this is what the pattern that emerges. So you can see with your own eyes what the Spanish Empire looked like, practically. It meant a lot of boats sailing out of Spain, which makes perfect sense, both ports in the north and the south, sailing down the coast, off Africa. A lot of activity down here, and a great deal circulating to and from the Caribbean. But can we see some very faint lines? I wish this was a bit darker, but can you see these faint lines down here? And a little bit of activity over to the Philippines, right? So again, one of the most just incredibly valuable resources for history. This is an accurate map of what colonialism really looked like. Now this era is just slightly before the era of new imperialism, which is meant to be mostly in the 19th and into the 20th century. But it does catch a bit of it, and it does catch the Industrial Revolution. Okay. And the last column here, imperial motivation. So I can give you kind of a hint with the Spanish Empire. The Spanish Empire is not only called that, it was also called the Hispanic Empire and the Catholic Empire. So what do you think one of their main motivations was? Religion. It's how the Spanish got permission to build these colonies in the New World. They went to the Pope, and the Pope said, you can be an empire as long as you convert the benighted indigenous peoples. As long as you save souls, you can be an empire. But also another major reason why Spain got into this business, I think we can remember this from the past. What were they so excited to find and they kept asking all the native peoples about? Give it 1 second. Yes. Gold. So the Spanish were also very interested in commercial, not just religion, but also commercial motivations.
But then also silver.
Oh yes, huge amounts of silver from mines in Potosi in Peru. That's where you got it right there. Okay. So Miss Ava, did we get our motivations? Gold and?
Gold in logs?
Logs, that's great.
Silver.
No, sure, silver. But you could just say commercial. Yeah, or gold and silver if you wish, that's fine. But what was the first reason the Spanish had? It was, they went to the Pope and they got permission. Does that give you a hint? Look on that column at the very top. There's 3 options for you. At the top of the 3rd column, there's 3 options. Territorial, commercial, and?
Oh, religious.
Yes, that's another major motivation for the Spanish. not so much for the others. Okay, so now let's move on to the French. The French. Now the French have two major phases of their colonial empire. The first phase and the second. So the first colonial empire and the second. Now this appears in blue. I forget if, yes, I think blue is the first one. Let's see. No, white is the first colonial empire for the French. So even though this map is in blue, it's going to be in white when we show a depiction of it. Where are we seeing this? Where on the map is the first French colonial empire?
Canada.
I heard Canada. What did you say? A little bit in Africa, yes. Now, which part of Africa? North, south, east, or west? West Africa.
India.
Yes, some in India as well. These major ports along the eastern seaboard of India. Has anybody talked about North? You said Canada specifically, but what else? You could just say North America, I think, broadly. What about the other parts of the Americas? What are we seeing? Which one? Come again? Yes, very much so. A lot of in fact, that island in particular that's divided in half is Haiti and Dominican Republic. Haiti becomes an incredibly important colony of the French system, so much so that when Haiti rebels, and it's the first slave colony to have a successful rebellion, it then essentially gets punished for that by the rest of the imperial powers. So the history of Haiti is very interesting, very important. Unfortunately, it's not really covered in the content standards, so we have to bring it up here and there. I believe that's Suriname, if I'm not mistaken. So just a toehold in South America. All right, and these are our French ship logs. So again, this era is going to be the beginning of the 18th century. Folks, that's okay. Beginning of the 18th century into the middle of the 19th. This is where all of the traffic in the first French colonial empire was heading. So where are we seeing mostly, or how about some of the outliers? Where are some of the outliers?
To the left of California.
Oh, really? Yeah. So that's out to the Hawaiian Islands. There's a couple of voyages. And you can see these are just faint little dots, right? So that would be one line on another, one row after another, yes. Yes, by all means. But mostly, they're circulating across the Atlantic here. They're sort of, this is the triangle trade kind of dynamic. All right. Let's move on to their second colonial empire. This is going to be the one in blue. So, Ava, for the first column in blue, you can write the second French colonial empire. France is white. It's the first colonial empire for France is going to be white, and blue is the second colonial empire. Okay? France 1 and France 2. So I'm going to compare between these two so you can sort of quickly see the difference. All right, I'll wait till some pens are down. I can see people are still writing. Yes, Museva. Can you get a what? Yes, that's fine. I have some right here. Yes, Kate. What was the motivation there? First France? That would be commercial mostly. Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to talk about that. So let's go back then. So a lot of what was happening here in the French colonial enterprise in North America was they were really not holding on to land and trying to build out colonies. They were mostly trading. They were trying to establish trade networks with the Native Americans and bring in like animal pelts that were highly desirable in Europe. But down here in the Caribbean, specifically Haiti and other places, the commercial interest was very traditional plantation-style slavery systems. So incredibly dangerous work, like harvesting sugarcane and then processing it into sugar, means superheating it, like boiling, this sort of like a molten sugar, which if you've ever touched like really hot sugar, it'll burn you, right? So that was kind of the environment and it's in the Caribbean, and it's hot. So long story short, the Caribbean was a space of really brutal resource extraction, and sugar was going back to the New World. But up in the North American colonies, it was more of these trading relationships. But still, as a whole, I would say that's commercial. The motivation for the French was commercial. Okay, and then this is just to point out, where's the difference geographically now for the Second Colonial Empire? A lot in Africa. Now, which parts of Africa? North, south, east, or west? West and the north, okay? So this is just across the Mediterranean. Algeria is just across the Mediterranean from Africa. And that relationship got established in this period, and it's still very strong to this day. And all of these countries. Now, it may not surprise you that outside of the indigenous languages of those areas, French is one of the most commonly spoken languages in West Africa. Yes, Ben?
Madagascar is new.
And Madagascar. Yes?
Vietnam.
Yes, this is Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. So the French have now extended in the second colonial phase into Southeast Asia. This region is called Southeast Asia. And they have essentially abandoned their position in India. Okay? So folks in the back, did we get the locations of the second colonial empire for France? It's going to be West Africa, North Africa, Southeast Asia, and if you want to throw in Madagascar, East Africa. Okay? All right, now, yes. Also commercial primary. Actually, no, I should say the second colonial empire of France. A little different. So there are commercial interests. There are plantations here in Southeast Asia. But a lot of this in Africa, this was part of what's called the scramble for Africa in the 19th century. This was all the Europeans trying to get position against each other. It was more of a territorial claim. So for the second French Empire, you would say commercial, but also territorial. That would be important. Territorial, specifically in Africa. Okay? So I believe this next set is going to be several in a row. Oh no, okay, it's just this one right here. All right, so now we're starting to see something a little different. Now we're not seeing so much of a concentration of colonial interest. It's not all in one part of the world. It's all over the world, but it's mostly on the coast. It's just these sort of little like port and extensions from the ports. A little different, obviously, up in Canada, just because of this is an extensive claim. There weren't a lot of people, English people, up in Nunavut, but little dots here in the Caribbean, South America. So I would say North America, Caribbean, South America, some in West Africa, and very importantly, South Africa. So make sure to include South Africa in the English colonial empire. Australia, which you can put that in Oceania if you wish. Oceania. Oceania.
New Zealand.
Yes, New Zealand, Australia, the islands off. I think those are the Cook Islands. And a little bit in India, of course, my God, absolutely central. Yes? Sure. Are you talking about the locations of the second? Okay, so for the French second colonial empire, the locations are going to be West Africa, North Africa, Southeast Asia. Yes. India of absolute central importance to Britain's empire. And also right here in Southeast Asia, I would say you can identify this as Singapore specifically. That's right there on the tip of Malaysia, the Malaysian Peninsula. Okay. So now let's look at the reconstructed map of their shipping. Vastly more extensive shipping, right? Now, do we remember one of the reasons why the Industrial Revolution happened in England? What happened with wood in England? They ran out of wood. Why would they run out of wood? Maybe. That's related to this. Ooh. Yes?
They were making boats.
They kept making ships. So the demand for ships was so high in England that they were running out of their own timber. Enormous amounts of shipping are occurring. This is the Horn of Africa. That's again where they have a toehold in modern day South Africa. Obviously, shipment of goods to India and the Spice Islands, the Southeast Asia, but just vast quantities of shipping. And then, of course, all the New England and North American colonies that we eventually emerge out of. All right, lastly, the reasons for this, almost primarily commercial. You could argue territorial if you wished, but they're not really forming like a lot of land-based. I mean, later on they kind of do. So maybe I throw in territorial as well with the British. We'll have to talk about that. That one's more complicated. They used a lot of indirect rule. So the Brits would be technically in charge, but they would have an elite class of the people who live there running the affairs. It's like the British Raj in India. It's kind of a racist caste system, basically. Dutch. So, with the Dutch, are you all seeing a similar pattern to the English?
Yeah. Except these guys.
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, it is.
Maria, what was your question?
What was the internal motivation for trade?
For which one, the first or second French? For both. The first would have been commercial, and the second was commercial but territorial.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so the thing about the Dutch, it's a tiny little country, very, very small, but it became this outsized influence on the world. And that's because this tiny little country was basically the first place to invent capitalism, modern capitalism, and a lot of the shipping and the financing of shipping ended up kind of starting here. There's a little bit here in North America. Do we know which part of North America was a Dutch colony?
Oh, shoot.
Places like Stuyvesant High School, famously, from this city in America, represent that Dutch name. In Old New York, so Old New York City, it was once called New Amsterdam. New York City was a Dutch colony. Much in the, I think those are the Lesser Antilles or Greater Antilles, but some in the Caribbean. So with the Dutch, you could say North America, Caribbean, South America, especially in Brazil, I think it's Pernambuco. West Africa, and really Central Africa, but South Africa is very important with the Dutch. The Dutch and English end up getting into a tussle called the Boer War, 1904. India and South Asia. Southeast Asia, my goodness. This is really where the Dutch the Dutch influence is massive. These are the Spice Islands. So these are all producing exotic spices like vanilla, say, or cinnamon, things like that. They become highly desired in Europe. And to center their empire, the Dutch invest tons of energy in Jakarta, Jakarta. So if the Brits had Singapore, the Dutch had Jakarta.
Stress.
Yes.
Japan.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, so these are ports in East Asia. You'll notice that East Asia really has never, in their relationships with European colonial situations. They've always had ports, but they've never really been colonial empires. They've run their own affairs. And one great exception to that being the Boxer War, when the Chinese and the Brits had to actually fight a conflict over whether or not they'd open their ports to trade. The Chinese lost that particular war. It stings to this day, but I'm sure they'll get their revenge. All right, the Dutch. So, similar pattern to the English, enormous amounts of shipping. Just look at how dense all these, columns are.
It's like slingshot.
Huge amounts around the Horn of Africa, Cape of Good Hope. Lots to the Caribbean. A little bit to Latin America. Yes, Ben.
What's the country above England?
Up here?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. What I imagine was going up there might have been whaling or something. That's Iceland. This is Norway. So I'm not sure what these boats floating up there were doing. Maybe they were trying to find a Northwest Passage. That happened a lot. And yeah, just to talk over the details then of Southeast Asia, because this is where I'd like us to focus as a class. Because the story of the Philippines is really central to this lesson, or this unit. This unit asks you first to understand where all the colonies were, then it asks you to understand the mentality and the justifications of the people forming these colonial empires. Then it asks you to consider it from the other perspective, the people being colonized, and finally their liberation. So I think the Philippines has got the whole story from start to finish there. But yes, this was the French here in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. In Indonesia, this was the Dutch. Singapore, Malaysia, Brunei, this would have been the British. And the Philippines, do we remember who was the first European colonial power in the Philippines? Who was the first? Spain. And they certainly brought in a lot of religion, a lot of traditions there from the Spanish tradition. A lot of names, Spanish names. So just to kind of compare, let's go back to like the English map. So sort of fix this in your mind of this pattern of shipping, and I'm going to go to a map of modern shipping. Looks pretty similar, right? Yes?
What was the motivation for the Dutch?
Oh, for the Dutch, commercial, and almost entirely commercial. They're not territorial, they're not religious, they're not religious very much at all. Okay. This is a map of cargo shipping today, well, as of March 13th or 31st, but it'll look very similar a few months later. Again, we have a great deal of movement. Now, boats are different. They're not powered by sail. They're generally moving on their own accord with fuel. So the routes are different. A lot more movement across the Atlantic in strange ways, not following the trade winds, And then if we shift the map a little bit to a Pacific-centered map, I think we can kind of see that the east to west movement of goods now between Asia and North America is absolutely the most important, or most dominant mode of shipping now. Enormous amounts of movement in various regions, but this is really the great consumer and the great producer, right? China and the United States. There was a historian who wrote a book called Chi-America because he said our economies are now united. This is our oil tankers moving oil and fuel around the world. Great deal of concentration in the Persian Gulf, also through the Suez Canal. And a lot over here too. You see this dense kind of package, like a cluster. We produce a lot of oil. In fact, the United States is the greatest producer of oil in the world. Venezuela, off the coast of Venezuela. One of the reasons why Venezuela in the news sometimes, they're thumbing their nose at the Americans, right? It's because they make so much oil. They know they've got money. They don't really have to ask for our approval to do things. We're going to move on and just look at some what am I looking at here? So I put this in, I guess just to make this point. The English colonies, by 1919, that was their peak, the largest empire in history. They had 23% of the Earth's population and 25% of the land, they claimed legally, they owned. Absolutely enormous So again, remember that thing about the French, the Second French Empire, wanting a territorial claim? That's partly because they were here, the English were right on their borders. Let's see what else we have. Right, I'm pointing to a couple of junctures. What time do we got? Oh, okay. All right, we'll pick this up tomorrow. Thank you all. Just bring that worksheet tomorrow.